Lately, it seems like there's been something missing from crypto. When blockchain technology first hit public consciousness, it was revolutionary and exciting. We were all going to debank ourselves, keep custody of our own assets, and no longer need to trust retail banks for custody or that central banks wouldn't inflate us into oblivion. Fast forward to 2023, and what are we now focused on in crypto? You guessed it. Basically, writing bank software that runs on the blockchain. Somewhere along the way, actual utility to real living, breathing humans gave way to the insatiable demand for liquidity measured by total value locked, TVL. We no longer craved freedom and self custody of our own liquid assets. Instead, we sought yields by locking our assets and being the liquidity for others. We were providing liquidity for others to convert assets so that they could also provide liquidity. In Cardano, I hope we can seize this opportunity to buck the all powerful TVL trend and get back to real human use cases and real human utility. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss the hilarious throttling of ETH on staking, at least hilarious for us over here in Cardano, how it's emblematic of the TVL over humans approach in some other ecosystems, the Djed launch next week, the Liqwid launch next week, an Handle Post-Mortem, and a new game from Paima Studios. If you saw this image and immediately knew it represented a person escaping locking protocols, see that he's got all of his coins and also his awkwardly sized hand clock representing his time. Or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Behold the greater crypto space, the world's greatest community of banking software enthusiasts. Is that what any of us signed up for? What are we even doing, guys? We've created enough, I'm going to call it banking software. We've created enough banking software to entice $47.82 billion to be locked into these blockchain software driven banks, basically. We've created a whole bunch of banks that live on blockchains. And look at the vast variety. We even have variety of colors in the logos. It's all very colorful, seemingly very innocent, but it would be hard for me to explain to someone outside of crypto how we're not a community of banking software enthusiasts. I don't think that's what we started out to be. When crypto first came around, the beautiful part of the whole idea was debanking ourselves, keeping custody of our assets, not giving our assets to a different sort of bank, not building out a million different varieties of banking software. Like this isn't what we set out to do. I know why this happens. There's no mystery how this happened or why it happened. It's because this is the highest economic calling for the developers. For crypto developers, this is how you make all the money. I mean, you could argue maybe if you make a really great NFT series at the height of the NFT market, maybe you make equal money. But generally, you're going to make the most money if you create some kind of a DeFi project that has a lot of total value locked. But total value locked, we talked about this today I had a great conversation with Paul and Patty over on Paul's channel, Cardano with Paul. You can go check that out. This topic came up. TVL sort of is, how does everybody feel about TVL? To me, TVL is the most anti-Satoshi invention in all of crypto. If we could have come up with something, over the last, half decade or whatever, that was intended to make Satoshi the most angry, like rolling over in his grave or wherever he is, he, they, she, whatever Satoshi was. If we tried to come up with something that was the most antithetical to Satoshi, it's probably measuring the entire ecosystem in terms of total value locked, because the whole idea was for us not to have to lock our assets with anybody. Satoshi was going for freedom and liberty of our assets and self-reliance, self-custody. The whole idea was to debank ourselves, to get away from the banks. What have we done? We've created a million colorful banks, and we've tried to make them look as unbank-like as possible. Look at this. Pink unicorns, little was it a bunny rabbit? These beautiful, colorful little logos to be as unbank like as possible. But if an alien came down and asked me, "Are you guys just super enthusiastic about banking software?" I would have to, I'd have to say, kind of, yeah, that's kind of what we've done here. Case in point, I'm seeing reports that Ethereum is throttling unstaking so hard that if everyone currently staked tried to unstake, it would take a full year. Obviously, this is kind of an unrealistic, framework for assessing the unstaking in Ethereum, because not everyone is actually going to want to unstake. But also, why would you ever throttle it that hard? Why? Only because throttling it that hard will prevent this gigantic dip in the amount staked. This gigantic dip, this gigantic fall off, this huge cliff in the amount of Ether locked in Ethereum staking, the total value locked. They don't want all of that Ethereum to come out of staking, because anytime you unlock anything, some portion of it ends up on the open markets. They don't want all that Ethereum suddenly being sold. People haven't had access to that Ether that was locked in staking for a long time, and they know some of those people need money, and some of them are going to sell as soon as they get it. So they're throttling withdrawals so hard that it would take a full year for everyone to unstake. This doesn't make any sense. This is putting total value locked, TVL, before the humans, before the human beings. It's like, does the protocol work for the humans, or are the humans just assets, basically cogs in the machine that make up the protocol? Are we working for the protocol, or is the protocol working for us? Because it seems like if the protocol is working for us, you'd just be able to unstake. And the people who developed the protocol would just allow sort of Adam Smith's hidden hand, the hidden hand of the market, to sort everything out. Sure, there might be a big dip, but maybe there needs to be a big dip. Maybe that's the natural thing that should happen in this market. Maybe there should be a giant dip. But this is just emblematic of something we see throughout a lot of crypto. We always have these little mechanisms that are preventing the users from doing what they actually want to do. And in some cases, that's probably a good idea. But in a lot of cases, it's just to service TVL. In a lot of cases, we figure out that the mechanisms underlying the DeFi projects are really all aimed at servicing TVL. That's the whole goal. How much value can we get locked in the protocol? That seems to be the goal of everything that's done in every DeFi project. And sure, there is some underlying utility there. Like some DeFi projects are aimed at facilitating loans. Some are aimed at facilitating the conversion of one asset to another, swaps. Decentralized exchanges allow you to exchange one cryptocurrency asset for another. There are assets there, but the way we construct those platforms, those protocols, is not with a priority given to that utility. The priority is more aimed at getting assets locked into the protocol. I think this is the wrong way to approach this. I think we've gone down the wrong road. I think we need to focus more on the human utility, because we think that DeFi is huge, but DeFi is not huge at all. In fact, the way we've gone about TVL, I think, has been this gigantic barrier to entry in crypto. If you explain to some normal person, if you try to explain to them how liquidity pools work and how they might suffer impermanent loss if they provide liquidity in a liquidity pool, they're going to run the other way. They're not going to like the sounds of that at all. It sounds terrible. It's this huge barrier to entry, but we keep pursuing this AMM structure because it creates this total value locked. I would argue that this is just all an artifact of the account balance system. They can't do order books like we can in Cardano. And even though we can do order books in Cardano, we have one. MuesliSwap basically launched as an order book. It wasn't the most attractive option because it doesn't facilitate TVL. It doesn't feed the TVL beast that everybody's pursuing. I think we need to turn away from that. I think we need to look more at the actual human utility. If a DEX is supposed to allow people to exchange cryptocurrencies, let's do that. Let's go in that direction. Let's make that the best experience possible. And true, you do need liquidity for that to happen. But I think an inappropriately large part of the way these protocols are structured is more aimed at the TVL piece. It's more like, how do we get people to provide that liquidity? How do we get them to, and you do need liquidity in order for people to make trades. That's true. But I think the way we've gone about it is more about servicing that TVL metric. We're trying to get as much locked in there as possible and not, I think we need to redirect to aim back at what's the most human utility. Because while crypto people love it, if you provide the best liquidity provision experience, the crypto guys are going to love it. But the mainstream, I don't think that's the best way to attract the mainstream. And if we never attract the mainstream, we're just going to remain this little tiny niche community. We'll never be adopted by the mainstream if we have these gigantic barriers to entry. Like, hey, we're going to give you all this rhetoric about, self-custody and having control of your own assets and freedom from banks and debanking yourself, unbanking yourself. Oh, but also the real thing we actually do once we get past all of the propaganda, the real thing we do is we try to get you to lock your assets in these protocols. And also we have this impermanent loss thing and you might lose all your assets, just so you know. So you are going to give up custody. You aren't going to have self-custody. Your assets are basically imprisoned in the platform. So we're going to talk about all the debanking yourself stuff, but really what we're doing is we're building these online banks. I don't think that's the way we attract the mainstream. I think the way we attract the mainstream is by providing the best experience to the consumer. TVL is the most anti-consumer thing ever. We want to be pro-consumer. If you want the masses from the mainstream to come into crypto, we need to be way more pro-consumer. We can't focus on getting people to lock assets in protocols. We have to focus on the best possible experience for the actual consumers of those platforms. We need to think about real world use cases. World Mobile came up in the same conversation with Paul and Patty. To me, World Mobile is one of the great examples in the Cardano ecosystem of a project with a mission that addresses an actual human use case. World Mobile, I don't know anything about the token. I can't tell you a thing about the World Mobile token. I don't know anything about it. I've never owned any of it. But when I think about a crypto project that has a mission that is exciting to me, that could draw in the mainstream, it's projects like that address real world things. Nobody from the mainstream wants to come in and be a liquidity provider and experience impermanent loss. That's a terrible anti-consumer proposal, right? If you go to some consumer and you describe that to them, they're gonna be like, hard pass. But if you talk to them about these real world use cases that actually apply to normal people who aren't, basically amateur financiers, those kinds of use cases are the ones that I think will actually draw in the mainstream. Not all of this, let's get you to lock your assets stuff. And just to be clear, for all of us who are already in crypto, we can still LARP as small-time financiers. We can still do that. I'm just saying we should do that to fund projects that address real-world use cases, not these projects that just address a use case that the people who are already in crypto will be interested in. We need to divert those funds instead of locking more and more funds in these very narrow niche use cases that only crypto people care about. We need to divert some of that money to the real world use cases. Speaking of DeFi, maybe the biggest news in all of Cardano, Djed is launching next week. This is pretty huge news. A lot of people have been waiting a long time for this. When did we learn? I believe it was in the Cardano Summit 2021 when Charles called Shahaf Bar-Geffen up on stage, and they announced that Coty would be launching Djed. It's been a long time coming. Here's a question that came up in terms of the Djed launch. This post says, I expect lots of traffic once Djed is launched. With only one wallet option at the time, are you ready, Nami Wallet? And people had a lot of different reactions to this. Most people were like, what? There's only going to be one wallet available when Djed launches? Other people pointed out, hey, Nami doesn't have its own servers. So really, you should be asking is, will Block Frost be ready? But this person down here, this poster provided what I think is a pretty logical answer. So they said, I don't know if this is why, but I have asked this question many times before, as other projects have done it, and many projects have told me it makes it easier for them to troubleshoot issues when using one wallet during launch and pick Nami because it's widely used and open source. If this is why they're using one wallet, this makes perfect sense to me, because if I was trying to be a scientist and isolate variables that might be causing problems I'm trying to troubleshoot, taking the wallet variable out of the equation and picking a wallet that's open source. Alessandro is notoriously pro open source. So of course, you might pick Nami because it's open source. You can actually examine the code and see what in the wallet's code might be interacting with your project in a certain way. You can actually troubleshoot the issue and isolate variables. So this makes perfect sense to me. I have no idea why Djed is launching with only one wallet, as is reported here. But if this is the reason, this actually makes perfect sense to me. Speaking of long-awaited big Cardano projects, it looks like Liqwid got their V1 audit report back, and they are launching next week. This was kind of unexpected news, I think, for a lot of people. It says, next stop, Liqwid V1 mainnet launch next week with a quick testnet or two in between. I have no idea how you get a quick testnet or two in just a week, and I don't know the nature of these test nets, if there's not going to be a public test net. I don't know what's going on here, but I think a lot of people are going to be, as you can see, this post got 28,000 views just today. I think a lot of people are going to be very excited for the launch of this long-awaited project. Handle recently posted a very detailed post-mortem on a double mint. Obviously, if you're Handle, you don't want to have double mints when the whole point is to provide this handle that only one person will possess. But I want to applaud this level of detail in a post-mortem. They didn't just sort of say, hey, here's a post-mortem and then tell us nothing. They actually provided a really detailed rundown of exactly what happened and what they're doing in the future to try to remedy this. So I commend you, Handle. This is definitely the right way to handle a postmortem. Finally, Paima Studios has announced a new game they have under development. You know them from their previous game, Jungle Wars, which utilized stateful NFTs. This new game is player versus player tower defense. And check out this little teaser they dropped. I won't play the video for you. You can go ahead and watch the video. It's only 9 seconds long, but it looks super interesting. Some people might think that games are trivial and that blockchain is meant for far more serious things, like allowing us to LARP as financiers, our favorite activity. I would argue that games certainly do have a lot of utility. In a modern, complicated world, I think entertainment and being able to escape, the escapism thing, I think there is real utility in that. For instance, here it looks like you can shoot some kind of a fire hose at your enemies. If I go out in the street right now and start shooting a fire hose at my neighbor's cars, I'm going to get in trouble, but not in this tower defense game. That's true utility to me. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.